Ladies and gentlemen, it's so great to be with you. I'm Vivian Salama of the Wall Street Journal, and we are obviously continuing the very important discussions that we've been having here today. We're here talking about Voice of Change, a talk for civil society leaders. Obviously, as someone who has covered wars for years, I can tell you that wars obviously have the greatest impact on civilians, on civil society. And one of the things that's very interesting, and perhaps something we need to constantly consider, is that one of the hardest hit societies in this war, this invasion of Ukraine, is also the Russian civil society. And we have to remember that there are other people on the other side of the border who are also impacted. And so, joining me is someone who needs no introduction, not only because he is a renowned chess master, grandmaster, but also a leading voice in Russian civil society and activism. Garry Kasparov, nice to be with you. So, as we say, the elephant in the room is what happened in the last couple of weeks in Russia with regard to perhaps what was the biggest challenge to President Putin's authority. And so I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about what that means, not only for Putin, but for the civil society and what comes next for Russia.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's unavoidable, just not to mention Prigozhin and whatever name you use for his performance, mutiny, rebellion. I'm not so sure what's the correct term, because I've been saying for a long time that analyzing Putin's Russia, we have to, look for Godfather, Maria Puzo. It's a mafia state, and that's why I think the Prigozhin's challenge should be viewed, from this angle. It's not a rebellion to challenge Putin as a president. I think it's a fight within inner circle, because Prigozhin's statements just prior to his challenge, they were concentrated on criticism of the war. It's not about, fight the war to the last soldier, but to the opposite, the war went in the wrong directions, and I'm not sure why Prigozhin said, why we attacked Ukraine at the first place. I think what we saw there was a clear message to Putin from some of his inner circle. And don't forget, Prigozhin served food to Putin. Knowing Putin's paranoia, you should understand how close Prigozhin was to Putin. It's a St. Petersburg mafia, and I think many of them, or some of them, are very much concerned now about losing business. So they don't care killing Ukrainians, Syrians, Africans, whoever, even Russians, but they do care about losing businesses. And I think it was nothing personal. Vladimir, so we are on the losing end of this war. And it's still a fight within Putin's inner circle, because some of them believe that they can win the war of attrition. And the reason I think Putin and some of his close supporters believe they can win the war by out-suffering Ukraine and waiting until there's a fatigue, grows in the West, it's indecisiveness of Americans and NATO. And hopefully this summit actually will send the right message to those who, like Prigozhin, believe that, they had to find a way out of this. I don't think Putin can accept it, but clearly, what's happened then it was demonstration that all this talks about escalation, it's a hot air. Because it's how can you expect Putin to start a nuclear war if he found no soldiers willing to die for him when 5,000 mercenaries marched to Moscow? Prigozhin had no intention of taking over Moscow. That's why the whole story about overwhelming force waiting for him at River Oka, nonsense. I think it was a message sent to Putin, and that's why I was puzzled to see that so many experts talked about Prigozhin's future. I mean, he met Putin now because they continue negotiations about preserving their business, and it seems to me that more and more people within Putin's inner circle getting really concerned about Putin's failed policies.
We could probably spend the entire day just talking about this. It was a very fascinating series of events. But I do want to ask you in general about the flow of information taking place right now in Russia. Obviously, this is something that's very relevant to me personally. My friend and colleague, Evan Gershkovich, is sitting in a Russian prison wrongfully detained on charges of espionage. But Russian media is also no stranger to this, and the Russian regime has been so intent to to control the messaging going forward. And so how then does civil society know what's true, manage to thrive, and continue from here?
There is no civil society. Russia today is, if you're an analog, in history, it's Germany 1943, 1944. So this is the agony of the regime that spent decades taking control of the public space. So one of the first attacks of Putin when he was elected president, so was to destroy independent media. So just to understand, the mood of people in Russia is just, remember that, the Germans fought to the last bunker, last soldier, after 12 years of Hitler in power. Putin is in power twice as long. And of course, the modern propaganda, the tools, they are far more sophisticated than Dr. Goebbels had at his disposal. And we have probably some Russians who are not, not willing to support the war. I don't think that the percentage of people who oppose war on moral ground was more than 10, maybe 10, 15%. The support for the war, I don't think is overwhelming, but majority just doesn't care and try to sit on the fence waiting for the outcome. The problem is the longer the war goes on, so this is the mood is hardening. And I'm not surprised to feel from, I say feel because I don't trust any polls, feel from Russian social media that the mood is hardening. So just because it's a war, we are, by the way, Putin's propaganda made it very clear. It's not a war against Ukraine. It's a war against NATO. So it's every day they say, we're fighting NATO, we're fighting NATO, we're fighting NATO. That's why all the cautious voices from the other side saying we have to avoid confrontation with Russia. It's a wishful thinking. Putin is fighting with you.
But that's a really extraordinary statement you just made, saying there's no civil society, and it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, even when my repeated trips to Ukraine, people who had relatives across the border in Russia, they would tell me, that we would call them, we would tell them what's happening here, and they don't believe us. They don't believe their own relatives. And so,
yes,
short of maybe a regime change, what will bring about a shift in Russia?
It's psychological. I think that's just the beginning of liberation of Russia from Putin's fascism will not start before Ukrainian flag is raised in Sevastopol, period. Anything else is wishful thinking. You have to kill the idea of the empire in the minds of Russians. They have to understand the war is lost. If Russian history is any guide, is the changes in Russia started with the lost wars and lost geopolitical battles. You can go back to the Crimean War, mid-19th century, Russo-Japanese War, and of course 1917, and even 1989, Afghanistan. So the moment Russian people understand that the regime is losing, and that could be the ultimate loss, the last war of Russian empire. Ukraine liberates all these territories, Sevastopol included. That's a message that we have to look elsewhere. Before it happens, nothing can change it. Even if you give me now 30 minutes uninterrupted on Russian television at 9 p.m. Prime time, I don't think I can tell anything before the map or the front line is still stable.
But is there no group, organization, or even individuals out there that are starting to raise questions when these young boys have one-way tickets to the front lines in Ukraine?
Look, people who marched with the peaceful on Russian streets, either in exile, most of us, or in jail, like Alexei Navalny and Karamurza and others, or killed like Boris Nemtsov. So again, public, yes, they are unhappy, but it's now a war that, again, we have no choice. If you live in Russia now, and again, I follow the social media, I could see that even pro-Western people, they say, we have no other choice. So again, it's only decisive Ukrainian victory, and sooner better will give us a chance to actually say, you know what, we have to start thinking otherwise. And also, it's very important to start, splitting Russian elite. And it's not going to happen unless, there's a very clear message about the end of the war. And I'm expecting here to hear the statement: Ukraine must win. And it's people I represent, the Russian Action Committee, the group I founded with Michael Khodorkovsky last May. We clearly say Ukrainian victory includes three things: liberation, reparation, and justice. Full liberation of Ukrainian territories, reparation, and justice. Justice is very important because that's the way to split Russian elite, to send a very clear message that all war criminals will be brought to justice. Because all Russian elite, they are thieves and thugs, but very few of them are murderers. So you have to make sure that governors, who are just not the most pleasant persons on this planet, again, thieves and thugs, they will have a chance to see their future separate from Putin and his military commanders and inner circle that are responsible for this horrible war.
What role is the Russian diaspora playing in all of this? There are powerful voices like yourself who have been calling for change, who are not based in Russia and immediately subject to the dangers.
Yes, and that's another problem. So I have to say that, unfortunately, I represent minority in Russian diaspora, in Russian political opposition. And the big debate here is whether it's Russia's war or Putin's war. Unfortunately, it's a Russia's war now, and we have many people who are trying just to undermine the sufferings of Ukrainians. It's a casualties of the war. We saw recently this debate about the shark, and the attacks on Estonian Prime Minister and others, who, I found it's despicable, because I believe that every Russian, myself included, just have a collective responsibility for the crimes committed in Ukraine. Though my first article about Vladimir Putin was published, about his threat coming from Putin, was published in the Wall Street Journal January 4, 2001. But I still understand, we have this responsibility, and we just, we have no rights, moral rights, to criticize Ukrainians, whatever they do. And unfortunately, we're facing the dramatic challenge for the future of Russia, because people will have this view of Russians as criminals, as they had against Germans, a grudge against Germans for many years. Unfortunately, majority of Russian political opposition and many groups who are, by the way, being generously funded by European Union or Americans, they just don't see it. And this is a big debate coming within us. And again, we're trying to make sure that people who are willing, what we say in half-jokingly, people who are willing to leave Putin's North Korea and to move to our, let's say, virtual South Korea, they have to say three things. As I say, 5 seconds without stuttering. War is criminal, regime illegitimate, Crimea is Ukraine. If you can say that, so you should be given a chance to be adopted in the free world. And we have, by the way, unique opportunity now with millions of Russians who left Russia. So they should be given a chance not to stay in a no man's land in the middle, just stuck in the middle. They should be given a chance to make this statement, to separate or to sever their ties with Putin's Russia and start building something outside of Russia, hoping that the moment comes, maybe sooner rather than later, we'll try to go back and just to rebuild our kind of from scratch. The problem is there's an irrational fear of Russia's collapse after Ukrainian victory. And let's be honest, that's the main reason why Americans are not willing to give all the weapons, because they see Ukraine wins, Russia loses, Russia collapses, China getting stronger, and that's geopolitical nightmare. Without having a comprehensive vision about what comes next in Russia, how we can play, using all these cards, including these millions of Russians in exile now. So we're not going to finish the war and also to offer some future for the whole region, not only for Ukraine.
I mean, we have an extraordinary collection of global influencers in the room and here at the summit. What's your message to them? What can they do to kick the can down the road for Russian civil society and help them to be free?
Again, I said it's mandatory. Ukraine wins. So sooner Ukraine wins, better chances for Russia to not to collapse completely. So it's a very good chance, and I think it's a tragedy that some of the Russian regions may decide to go on their own. Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Chechnya, not a big deal. So it happens. We have to make sure that Russian transformation will be a peaceful one from an empire into the confederation and parliamentary republic. Is it possible? Yes. Because if Russia loses the war soon and Putin regime collapses, and it's inevitable, you have many Russians looking, east and west and recognizing the dilemma is simple. Either you become the subordinate to China, and let's not forget, China is the only country that has a massive territorial claim to Russia. Just the size of territorial claim is 1.5 million square kilometers. The entire piece from Vladivostok, which is called on Chinese maps now Han-Shen-Li, to Irkutsk. So, and it's based on the old maps and old treaties between Russian kingdom and Chinese empire. So if China is one choice, Europe another one, majority of Russians will move in this direction. I say, don't expect my compatriots, unfortunately, to accept values of the free world by heart, but they do it by stomach. So this is a way to be cynical about it. So and also the war. This war is a war about values. So that's why it is good that we talk about civil society. You see the difference between the war being conducted on two sides. Ukrainians are trying to avoid casualties. Russians deliberately attack civilian population. So that's why the whole idea that you can negotiate peace is impossible. Not every war ends at negotiating table. War on values cannot end at negotiating tables, whether it was a World War II or American Civil War. Thanks God it was not negotiated. So this is because there's no negotiated outcome if you have two very opposite set of values. Putin wants to bring the world back to the might is right. Ukrainians fighting, just the only war NATO was built for, which is defending free Europe. And that's why I think, again, this recognizing that, you have to find the right algorithm to kill this irrational fear about collapse of Russia and helping Ukraine win as soon as possible is the only way forward.
We have only about 30 seconds left, but I want to quickly ask about sanctions and its impact on Russian society. Do you feel like it's it's penetrated at all, or if it's had a negative impact?
Sanctions are biting, but again, Russia knows how to evade them, and it's unfortunately, while we have 11 packages of sanctions in Europe, so the mechanism of forcing them is not there. You have to start showing teeth and punishing companies that are helping Russia to survive. Yeah, it's nice to read, that business is flourishing, that Raiffeisen Bank quadrupled its profit in 2023, but that's how Putin regime gets, gets their hopes alive. They believe that somehow they can win this war of attrition, psychological, financial, and then maybe a miracle happens. Trump wins, something else happens. We have to kill these hopes by demonstrating that the West is united, free world is united by helping Ukraine to win, and it also means forcing sanctions to work.
A very short but informative conversation. Thank you so much, Garry Kasparov. Thank you so much, everyone.